I think one of the hardest teams to grade in the 2015 NFL Draft, honestly, is the New Orleans Saints. And there's a couple of reasons why. Number one, the Jimmy Graham trade. Because, frankly, nobody in theory that they were going to draft with the first round pick they got as part of the package for dealing Jimmy Graham was going to add up to being a Jimmy Graham type of player. You would think, in theory, chances are that that's going to be the case, even though Graham himself was once a third round pick. I'm just saying. So that kind of skews the viewpoint here a little bit. Then you look at the other viewpoint, and that is the fact that the Saints were sitting in a very good position of power with 5 picks in the first 2 days of the draft. You're talking about 2 first-round picks, a second-round pick that was pretty high, and then 2 third-round picks. So the easy thing to do when you look at a team with that many picks in the first 2 days is they're automatically going to get a really good grade because they had a lot of so-called marquee picks, if you will. Well, just because you have a ton of those picks doesn't mean that you do a good job with them. It doesn't mean you automatically merit a really high grade. Although it seems like sometimes that's the trap that certain draft evaluators and draft nicks and experts fall into. Teams got a lot of picks. That means they did well in the draft automatically. So, like I said, when it comes to the Saints, it becomes a little more difficult to grade their draft. But that's what I'm here to do. Now, in terms of the 2015 NFL Draft for the New Orleans Saints, I expected them to focus on 2 primary things. Number one was looking to rebuild and retool that defense on the fly. A defense that showed a lot of improvements in 2013, regressed mightily again in 2014. They need a lot of help in all areas on the defensive side of the ball, especially in the back half of that defense. And then I figured at some point in time they were going to go about trying to protect Drew Brees and help out Drew Brees with some additional weapons on the offensive side of the ball. But I was expecting the bigger emphasis and focus to be on the defensive side of the ball. And that's pretty much how this draft played out for the New Orleans Saints. And you look at it, they did definitely address the defense multiple times with many picks. Their second first-round pick at Stephone Anthony, the inside linebacker from Clemson, Hau'oli Kikaha, the edge rusher from Washington, round 2, P.J. Williams, the corner from Florida State in round 3. And you look at round 5, they addressed it with 3 defensive players, Tull, the edge rusher from UT-Chattanooga, Tyeler, Davison, the defensive lineman from Fresno State, Damian, Swann, the corner from Georgia. You could definitely tell there was a priority, a premium, and emphasis being placed in the Saints' war room on the defensive side of the ball. Was that the right way to go? Did they execute well? That's what I'll talk about here in a moment or two. But, like I said, I was expecting them at some point in time to address the offensive side of the ball, and they did. They spent their first-round pick. It caught some people, I think, by surprise on Andrus, Peat, the offensive tackle from Stanford. You're looking to protect Drew Brees because that's been one of the big problems for that Saints offensive line over the past couple of years. They've been somewhat suspect, if you will, in their pass protection. Now you bring in a young potential blindside protector in Andrus, Peat. Then you look at the fact that they're preparing for the future as well by drafting Garrett, Grayson, the number 3 quarterback in this year's draft, in my opinion, out of Colorado State. Here's a guy that reminds me somewhat of Derek Carr, a guy that I think is a good fit for that Saints system, and a guy that could be the potential heir apparent. But not a lot else. I mean, yeah, they spent a 7th-round pick on the running back from Missouri, Marcus Murphy, but primarily they focused on the defensive side of the ball, which I understand and I get to a degree, but I'm not sure that the Saints did as good as they needed to in this draft. Now, in terms of their best pick, I'll go with Stephone Anthony, the inside linebacker from Clemson. I personally thought he was the best inside linebacker in the 2015 NFL draft. He was the guy I was talking about that I thought would end up ultimately being the first inside linebacker taken and go somewhere in the late portion of round 1, and that's exactly what he did. Some people might think he's a bit of a reach. He was more of a late round 2 prospect. I disagree. I think he was more of a late round 1 prospect, and I think he went right about where he should have, right in the area he should have, to a team that he should have, because as bad as the edge rushers were for the Saints last year, their inside linebackers were pretty brutal too, and now you've definitely upgraded the inside. Guys that could surprise, I look at a guy like Hau'oli Kikaha. This is a guy that was a very productive edge rusher, obviously, at Washington as part of that very talented defensive unit with guys like Danny Shelton and Shaq Thompson and Marcus Peters, all first-round picks in this year's draft. I look at a guy like Kikaha. I had him rated a little bit lower in the draft, in part because of the 2 ACLs he's torn. But this is a guy who's a very productive edge rusher. He plays with strength. He's very explosive. He's a guy that you can plug and play and just tell him, if anything else, keep it simple as a rookie. Just go after the quarterback. He's a guy that could end up outplaying his draft position, as could somebody like a P.J. Williams from Florida State. Here's a guy that has a lot of the tools you would think it takes to be a starting corner at the NFL level, and he's probably not going to be asked to be the #1 corner for the Saints. So as a result, playing against another team's #2 or #3 wide receiver might allow P.J. Williams a chance to shine at some point in time. There are some things I second guess about this draft, though. First and foremost is the fact that at no point in time did they spend a single pick on either a wide receiver or a tight end. You traded away Jimmy Graham, you traded away Kenny Stills, and at no point in time did you attempt to address that by replacing them with any draft pick investment at either of those two positions. I understand somewhat maybe you didn't think wide receiver was a huge need, but it was. You've got an aging Marcus Colston. You've got a Brandon Cooks who might be best suited to play long-term in the slot at the NFL level. And you really don't have much else around those guys in the wide receiving core. And at the end of the day, the identity of your franchise and your ultimate success or failures as an organization are going to pin on Drew Brees, not your rebuilt defense. You got to help out Brees. Offense is the name of the game. Offense is your identity. You got to help him out. And I was stunned and flummoxed that at no point in time, with another really good wide receiver class, did the Saints dip into that class at any point in time. Same thing with the tight end position. I mean, just because you might think you didn't need Jimmy Graham doesn't mean you don't need a tight end. You might think some of the guys that you have could fill some of that role, but they could fill some of that role. They are role players. They are not Jimmy Graham type of players. And there might not have been that type of tight end in this year's draft, I agree, but there were some quality starters there like a Max Williams or a Clive Walford, and the Saints didn't go after any of them at any point in time. I was really, really surprised by that. And when you look at it, now you also come into the whole thing, you basically traded away Jimmy Graham and a 4th-round pick for Max Unger and Stephone Anthony. Did you really improve your team with that deal? I understand the salary cap ramifications, but again, it's hard to feel bad for the Saints about it because they ultimately put themselves as an organization in that position. That's your own goddamn fault. I think they became worse, not better, because of that deal. I look at them taking Andrus Peat at number 13. I understand the notion of wanting to protect Drew Brees, but Devontae Parker's on the board. An aging Colston to Cooks coming off of an injury, he might be best suited for the slot. You needed help at wide receiver no matter what, and to me, Devontae Parker was a superior prospect on the board. Why you wouldn't take him absolutely defies logic to me. There were other tackles you could have taken. You could have spent the 31st overall pick perhaps on a tackle, or perhaps your high 2nd-round pick on a tackle, like, let's say, a guy like Jake Fisher out of Oregon as an example. I just really didn't get it. I look at their draft. I look and I see, Andrus Peat, Stephone Anthony, Hau'oli, Kikaha, Garrett, Grayson, and P.J. Williams. My opinion, what I would have done would have been maybe Devontae Parker. I'll stick with Stephone Anthony, that's fine. But maybe Max Williams in round number 2. I understand the thought process behind taking a Garrett Grayson. Maybe, but did you necessarily have to? Maybe you could have taken a different guy, an edge rusher there in round number 3. It's just thoughts that I have. Like I said, it's hard on the one hand because no matter what they did in this draft, it was going to be hard for them to look really good since they traded away Jimmy Graham. On the other hand, because they have a lot of picks, especially high picks in the first 3 rounds, a lot of people were going to grade them very well, whether they deserve it or not. Frankly, I thought the Saints just kind of had a middle-of-the-road draft. They didn't do a very good job of accumulating additional draft pick currency, which I thought they needed because there's much more work to be done on both sides of the ball in that Saints roster than a lot of people like to let on because it's the Saints and the media seems to love the Saints, which is fine. But it doesn't mask the fact to me that this is a team that had needs all over the place. And I would have thought in particular with the 2016 draft that might be shaping up to be better than this 2015 draft class was, why not try to accumulate some additional draft pick currency in that year's draft by maneuvering in this draft, or perhaps even trying to trade up in this draft at some point in time in the first 3 rounds. You have those additional picks there. You either use them for players or you use them to move up and get a different player. I just didn't like the philosophy and the execution of this Saints draft this year. I just didn't. I didn't think this was Mickey Loomis's finest hour in a recent draft history filled with a lack of Mickey Loomis's finest hours. I give the Saints nothing more than a C. I thought they could have done better. Yes, they could have done worse, but they needed to do a whole lot better than they ultimately did.